guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm really excited because I'm going to be talking about the 17 books that I finished in both April and May. I'm gonna start with my lowest reads and work my way up to my best read of the 2 months. So without further ado, let's get started. The lowest read that I had for these 2 months was The Soulmate Equation by Christina. I really wanted to give, more traditional romance a shot. And when I say traditional, I mean something that isn't mixed with fantasy or isn't mixed with a thriller or a sci-fi. I wanted to just read a romance. So I thought that the premise for The Soulmate Equation sounded super interesting. It's about, in this world, this new company developed an app, a dating app, that uses DNA to match people up with their soulmates. I thought that sounded really interesting, but unfortunately for me, the story was actually not interesting. I feel like the trope kind of wanted to start off with a hate to love romance, or what is it called? Enemies to lovers. But I felt like it was too quick. Once they started to like each other, I lost all interest in it. I felt like all the stakes were gone, and I was just like, okay, we're just waiting for them to do the dirty, and that's about it. So that's why I gave this book 2 stars, and probably my lowest 2 stars out of all the books that I read. If you're up to me, you can skip this romance. But just on a side note, I am currently reading The One this month because it has a very similar premise with the app that matches people up with their DNA, but it's actually a sci-fi thriller. So hopefully I'll enjoy this premise under this genre. Anyway, getting off topic, the next worst book that I read for these 2 months was Mysteries of Thorn Manor by Margaret Rogerson. Now, I listened to this on audio, actually. So the Mysteries of Thorn Manor is the novella set after Sorcery of Thorns. I have it right here. Now, I really enjoyed Sorcery of Thorns. This book was really great. It's about, so this girl, she's trained to, I guess, be a keeper of grimoires, and grimoires are books with magic in them that, if released, can do some serious harm to people, especially the more dangerous ones. Now, I think she was in charge of keeping these books, and one of them escapes, so she goes on an adventure to try and undo her mistakes, basically. And so I can't really get into the sequel without spoiling Sorcery of Thorns, but all I gotta say about that one is it follows the characters that we love from this book, but unfortunately, I felt like there are no stakes in that one, not like there were in this. I kept wondering what was the whole point of the novella. For me, it was a little too lighthearted, and when it tried to get more serious, it focused too much on the romance, which I felt like this book did not do. Like, there is romance in here, but it's not the main focus. So I guess that's one of my bookish pet peeves, is when a book has a very serious storyline, but the romance takes over the whole story. Can't do that. And that's what I felt happened in the novella. So if it were up to me, you can also skip the novella, but do read Sorcery of Thorns. All right, the next book that is number 15 is Wilder Girls by Rory, which I have right here. It started off interesting. I'm not gonna lie. I read this book in just a few days, and it started off really interesting, but my interest started to wane as the story went on. So I should probably say what it's about, huh? The main character in this book lives on an all-girls boarding school on a remote island. There's this, a disease that spread through the school, and so the school goes into quarantine. It affected the people in weird ways. These girls started to develop strange wounds on their bodies that were kind of animalistic and were actually very gory and disgusting. So there are some body horror in this one. I believe it's a sci-fi horror, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess this book just follows these girls' struggle to survive. The main character, I guess, just goes along with whatever the rules are for their school until her best friend goes missing. And that's when she starts to break the rules. Now, like I said, this book had a very interesting beginning. I enjoyed the first half, but towards the middle, things just kind of went a little crazy, kind of went off the rails, I guess. I was just struggling to keep up and stay invested when I just wasn't following the story. A lot of it didn't make sense to me, or it did make sense, but I was wondering why the author was even going there. And then the ending just killed it. Basically, this book went from a 4-star to a 2-star with this ending, in my opinion. I don't know if other people liked it, but I just don't like ambiguous endings where it's not really clear what happens. I like stories to have conclusions, and that one did not. The next book on my list, number 14, was The Perfect Marriage by Jeneva Rose. Now, I listened to this on audio, and okay, this book kept me hooked the whole time. I think I finished it in 2 days, but I still gave it 2 stars. Now, how can a book keep me hooked for that long but only get 2 stars? Perfect Marriage is about this married couple who've been together for like 10 years. They seem to have a really good relationship from the outside until the husband gets arrested for murdering his mistress. And his wife, who is this very I guess very sought after, very renowned defense attorney, decides to defend him. I don't know about you, but I don't know what kind of crazy woman would defend her husband after he kills his mistress that she didn't even know about. But that premise was super interesting. I wanted to see what were the motivations of all these characters. I wanted to know what happened. So that's really what kept me hooked and kept me going throughout the whole story. I had to know what happened. But that ending is basically what dropped it down to a 2-star. I didn't like it, and that's all I can say without spoiling anything. It just wasn't a satisfying ending to me. The next book on my list is 9 Liars by Maureen Johnson. Now, I don't have the first 3 books in the Truly Devious series. 9 Liars is the 5th book in the series. I definitely think this 5th one was the lowest in the series, the most disappointing. I actually love the first 3 books. I thought the 4th book was really good also, but 9 Liars basically follows the same characters from the first 4. It follows Stevie, who's this amateur detective who gains a lot of fame for solving this cold case. This mystery actually was really interesting. She goes to England or London. I think she goes to London for this school trip, and she gets entangled up in another cold case. This cold case is really interesting because it's about these group of friends who go to this mansion to, you know, to have a party, and by the morning 2 of them are found murdered. It was an interesting premise. It was an interesting start, but for me, this book didn't focus enough on the mystery. So I felt like the first 4 books had a good balance, but the 5th one did not. There was way too much personal life, drama, romance in this one. Just like, what was the other book I was mentioning? Mysteries of Thorn Manor. My pet peeve, when a story focuses too much on the romance and not enough on the main storyline. So the next book on my ranking was Murder Your Employer by Rupert Holmes. The narration was good. The premise was good. So Murder Your Employer is about this man who attempts to, or I guess these people. So Murder Your Employer is about this man who is terrorized by his boss. His boss basically ruins his life. So he attempts to murder him, but gets caught by this group of people who, instead of turning him into the police, they decide to invite him to this secretive school where they teach you how to kill people. Now, that was a very interesting premise to me, and it kept me hooked. I do feel like this book went on a little too long though. That's the only reason why I had to only give it 3 stars. The premise was good, the character development was great, the story which was interesting. It was just too long. The next book on my list was The Kind Worth Saving by Peter Swanson. Now, this is the sequel to The Kind Worth Killing, and I really enjoyed that book. I gave it 4 stars, I think earlier this year is when I read it, and unfortunately it was not as great as the first book. Now, the second book still follows some of the same characters from the first book, and I can't really talk about it without spoiling. I felt like what was great about the first book was that these characters were so like enticing. Like, learning more about the characters from the first book, especially the main female character, was so interesting, but I felt like we didn't hear much from her as much from her in the second one. And some of the new characters that were involved in the story were just not interesting. Like, they were just kind of annoying. I don't know. I guess I love the main character from the first book because she's so smart but also so manipulative and a very complex character. Like, she's very morally gray, and I just love that. I loved trying to like wrestle with my feelings about whether I wanted to root for this character or not in the first book. But this second book, it didn't have that complexity. These characters were more one note for me, so I didn't enjoy following them. Now, the next book that I gave 3 stars was Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. Now, in April, I reread The Hunger Games and Catching Fire, and then I continued on with Mockingjay in May. And I guess I'll just talk about all 3 of them together. I think my opinion of these 3 are pretty common, you know. I still feel like this trilogy holds up till this day. I still enjoy reading it with each reread. I definitely enjoy the first 2 books a lot more than the last one. I don't know who wouldn't know the story about the Hunger Games anymore, but I definitely enjoyed my reread. I still loved following Katniss and the story of Panem and the Hunger Games and seeing her develop as a character, like all the action sequences. I love the romance in here. It's one of the few romances that I don't absolutely hate, so that has a lot to do with it also. Unfortunately, Mockingjay still doesn't do it for me, like just like before. I still think it's the weakest in the trilogy, and this trilogy did not end well because of it. So I mean, that's all I gotta say. I should probably mention, out of the 3 5 stars that I have for these 2 months, Catching Fire and The Hunger Games are 2 of them. So I'll just spoil that right now so that when I get to my 5 stars, I can talk about my 1 unexpected 5 star. Now, the next book that I gave 3 stars was Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. I really enjoyed quite a few of Colleen Hoover's books. I think I have 2 of them back here. Oh yeah, It Ends with Us and It Starts with Us. Like, I enjoyed those, so I wanted to keep giving Colleen Hoover a try. And the next one that I saw was Reminders of Him, and I thought the premise was really interesting. Now, Reminders of Him basically follows this woman who was just released from prison for causing the death of her boyfriend. And she returns to the town that she used to live in order to build a relationship with her daughter, who she gave birth to in prison and had to give up. Now, she returns to this town despite most of the town knowing what she did and hating her for it, but she does it because she wants to finally see her child. Now, this book really had me thinking. It had me flopping back and forth between what was right and wrong. Also, like, seeing 2 sides, 3 sides, 4 sides of a story. Like, it really shows that even if something may seem very black and white, there's so much more involved when dealing with people's emotions and stakes that are this high. It really had me thinking, like, what would I do in this situation? I really had no idea. There was just a lot to talk about. There's a lot to discuss. Now, the reason why this book, despite all those good things that I just said, there's a reason I gave this book only 3 stars. And it's because my pet peeve is popping up again, where these really great themes and moral discussions, and you ruin it with the romance, overriding people's main purpose, or overriding their parental instincts, overriding their care for people they actually have known for years. Like, I just didn't buy it. The main romance in this book was so stupid. So stupid that despite all the great things I had to say about this book, I pushed it down 2 stars because that romance was just dumb. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. The last 3 stars that I gave for these 2 months was Fireborne by Rosaria Munda. This was another book that really had me hooked in the beginning. Like, I thought I was good. It was giving me the 4 or 5 star vibes when I first started it. So this book is about a teenage boy and this teenage girl who grew up in this really tough world. They grew up in this country where it was previously ruled by dragon lords. When these 2 teenagers were children, there was a rebellion that overthrew the dragon lords and was replaced by the rebels. I guess they were both traumatized in different ways by the rebellion, by what happened when the dragon lords were overthrown. And now, as young adults, they are both vying to be dragon riders who are basically the guardians, the enforcers, the main army. There's a lot of, you know, political intrigue in here, a lot of political discussions about what is right and wrong. It jumps back and forth between the present timeline where the two are trying to be the top dragon rider, and the past timeline showing these two growing up and the very different situations that they grew up in and how they were affected by what happened in the past. I felt like the voices of these two main characters were very distinct. Like I grew to really understand them, understand their motivations, understand their pain, basically their purpose. Like it made sense to me why they were the way they were, despite how complex it was. So I felt like the characters were really well developed. I enjoyed following them. But the reason why I gave this book 3 stars was, number one, my pet peeve, again, where the romance aspects of this book kind of took over more than I thought it should. Like, I get that they're teenagers, but I feel with the amount of stakes that this book had, they shouldn't have been focusing that much on the romance aspect of it. I also felt like the plot got weaker in the second half. Like the pacing got a lot slower in the second half. It got a lot more boring, more one note towards the second half, and that ending was very disappointing. So unfortunately, this book dropped the ball, in my opinion. Now, finally, thank goodness, I can stop talking about the not so great books and I can start talking about the really great ones. Now, the first 4-star book that I want to talk about is The Midnight Library by Haig. Now, I wasn't sure whether I was going to like this book or hate it because I'd seen it both ways. I've seen people who say they really enjoyed it. It was a great book. And I've seen a couple who say they absolutely hate it. It's problematic. I wasn't sure how I would take it when I got into it. I actually really enjoyed this. So in this book, Nora is basically miserable. She's depressed. She has nothing to live for. So she decides to end her life. Instead of just dying, she ends up in this magical in-between where she is in a library, and the magical librarian explains to her that each book in this library tells a story of an alternate life that she could have had if she had made different decisions. Now, Nora spends the book, you know, trying out different choices that she could have made and seeing where her life would have ended up. And I really enjoyed following her. I love the idea of that, where your life could be completely different if you had taken a different route, if you had made a different choice, if you had had the courage to take a risk, or if you had followed your gut and done something differently. So that's something I really enjoyed about this. And I loved seeing all of Nora's different lives and her kind of having to wrestle with realizing that life isn't always so simple. It's not just making one decision will change your life and make it perfect. I loved looking at the different, I guess, the different reasons why people have to live. And I know a lot of people say that this book is problematic because it simplifies depression, it simplifies thoughts of suicide, and it doesn't really show what a person goes through when they've reached the point that Nora has. And I definitely get that. So I feel like if those topics are triggering to you, I definitely think you should look more into it before you decide to read this book, because I wouldn't want anybody to be hurt in any way by reading this. The next book that I gave 4 stars was Yesterday by Felicia Yap. Now, this book was recommended to me by one of my followers on Instagram, and I'm so glad that I decided to get it and pick it up. Now, in this book, all humans have basically lost their memory as they go into adulthood. I think when you turn 18, most people lose their short-term memory. So there's 2 basic classes in this world. There are people who remember 1 day in the past, and there are people who remember 2 days in the past. If you have 2 days worth of memory, you're much more capable, you're much more intelligent, you're much more responsible and able to handle. People with 2-day memories are the only ones allowed to be in government, allowed to be in law enforcement, all the high paying, more powerful jobs. There's a main story going on, but there's also like a lot of discussion on class differences and the morality of it, the reasoning behind it. And I feel like this type of class system was used to discuss like real world class differences and how some people think they're better than others due to, you know, things that are out of people's control. But I also love the main mystery in this book, where the main couple in here is a man who's a duo. He has 2 days worth of memory, and a mono wife who have been married for many years, and their marriage is under scrutiny because it's not normal in society for a duo and a mono to be together. A woman is found missing, and the husband is a suspect in her disappearance. Now, this story was really interesting. I enjoyed following the characters. I enjoyed the world building. Like, this world was so fascinating. So I definitely recommend, if that sounds interesting to you, you should definitely pick this book up. Now, the next book that I gave 4 stars was Saga Book 1 by Brian K. I really hope it's pronounced Vaughan. Brian Vaughan and Fiona Staples. Now, Saga is a graphic novel, and I read the bind up edition of the first, like, how many volumes, I don't even know, but it was the deluxe first edition. I picked this up on a whim, and I'm glad that I really enjoyed it. So it's basically about these 2 different races of I guess aliens who live on separate worlds, and their worlds are at war with each other. So they end up falling in love and having a baby, and they have to go on the run because their own people are hunting them down. Now, I found this story really interesting. The stakes were very high from the beginning. It's very action-packed. Seeing all the different like races in this world was crazy. The illustrations were very gory. Like, there was a lot of blood, a lot of deaths. And also, the one thing I disliked was there was also a lot of like vulgarity, a lot of nudity, a lot of sex that were depicted in this graphic novel. That I found a bit like distracting. I didn't see the purpose of having it. I didn't think it added to the story. So it's the one negative part I have for it. But the world building and the story and the pacing, the action of it was top tier. So I definitely recommend, if you are interested in sci-fi action graphic novels, I definitely recommend Saga. I'm eagerly anticipating having the second book available to me so I can continue on with the series. The last 4 stars that I'm going to talk about is the House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. Oh, I have the book here without the dust jacket. I bought this used, that's why I don't have the dust jacket on. But I mean, these amount of tabs, I can definitely see that I enjoyed it. Surprisingly, actually. I mean, I really didn't like Throne of Glass. I read the first book, didn't want to continue. I read the first 3 books in A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I thought they're good. But I mean, after the 3rd book, I lost interest. So, you know, I guess mid-range, 3 to 4 stars for those books. But Crescent City, this was, I guess, technically the first adult book that Sarah J. Maas wrote, if I'm not mistaken. And I really enjoyed a lot her adult writing style, a lot more than her young adult or her new adult. I felt like this book had a good balance of the fantastical elements, the world building, the lore of this world. It had a good balance with the romance side that she usually writes about. I felt like that was the imbalance in the first 2, or the other 2 series that I've read by her was a bit too much romance for my taste. But I felt like this book really did focus more on the mystery and the fantastical elements of this story, of this world. So I think that's definitely why I enjoyed it more. I actually ended up rooting for the main romance in here because it was so slow burn. It was so slow burn. It was a slow burn romance. Like, there's like 800 pages in here, and I think a lot of the complaints that people have about this is the romance really doesn't get going until like the end of it, and I love that. There was still a lot of I guess, what is it called? Not angst. Oh yeah, there was angst, but there was a lot of like, I guess the characters really like were yearning after each other but fighting their feelings. I forget the words to describe it, but basically this is the kind of romance I enjoy, where it really takes its time to get developed. But more of what I want to talk about is this world. So we follow Bryce, who is a half fae, half human, living in this magical urban city full of many different races and many different types of magic. Now, I kind of love this. I don't really think is it considered an urban fantasy? I mean, it's not set in the real world kind of, it's not like Mortal Instruments or Harry Potter where it's set in the real world and there's magic in it. It's its whole different world. It just happens to be very technologically advanced and very modern in how it's depicted. So I really enjoyed seeing that. Like, I kind of find urban fantasy set in the real world kind of boring. So I really enjoyed Sarah J. Maas creating this whole new world that I could learn about. Sometimes I found Bryce annoying, to be quite honest. Like, I didn't really like love her instantly, but I do like that she definitely has her faults. She definitely has the things that you will love and hate about her. So I felt like she was a well-developed character. And I mean, that's all I have to say. I do plan to, I already purchased House of Sky and Breath, the second book, and I'm waiting for it to come in. And when it does come in, I do plan on doing a reading vlog on it because I really think I'm going to enjoy the second book just as much as I enjoyed this one. Now, getting into the last book that I'm going to talk about, the best book that I read in April and May that I gave 5 stars, besides, you know, I talked about the Hunger Games already. The #1 book that I read in the last 2 months was Sixth of the Dusk by Brandon Sanderson. Now, you may be thinking, my favorite book of the last 2 months was a novella. I guess that's common, or not. It's not common. It's unlikely, but it does happen. And this book was probably only 200 pages, but I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I haven't ordered it yet to add to my Brandon Sanderson shelf, but it's definitely one of my favorites written by him. It's set in the Cosmere, but it's set in a completely different world than his other series. Now, Sixth of the Dusk follows this man who is basically, I think he's like a hunter. On this world, there are many different islands that have very dangerous creatures, magical creatures, and animals on them. And Sixth of the Dusk, that's his name, is one of those professional hunters who are able to explore these islands and have learned like the traditional methods of surviving on these islands that were passed down from generation to generation. And I really enjoyed exploring this world with him. We basically are only on one island, but we learned so much about this world and about this island in the 200 pages that we are given. And this main storyline where Sixth discovers or rescues this woman from this island and learns that the island and everything he has known and loved and grown up on is at risk by these new group of people who are trying to use magic to, I guess, tame the land. And I can't really talk about it too much because it is a novella, so it's pretty short. But what I really loved about it was the world building, the lore, getting to learn about this whole new world in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere universe. I wish there was a full-on series that takes place on this world, or at least that he writes another book about it. That would be the best. I felt like this book had a very great balance. Like, this world was so fascinating, and I'm only disappointed that it was so short. The pacing was great, the action was great. I really love following these characters. I just really enjoyed this book. I wish it had lasted longer. But yeah, that's it, guys. Those are all the 17 books that I read in April and May this year. And there are a lot of not so great ones, but there are a few great ones in there that really helped make the last 2 months of reading worth it. I'm hoping that this month in June I'll read a lot. My reading month will be a lot better. Wish me luck. Let me know if you guys have read any of these books and what you thought about them. I'd really be interested to know, especially if you loved a book that I didn't really like, or you really hated a book that I really like. I love seeing people have different opinions, or if you have the same opinions, let me know. And with that said, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.